I recently started considering how much money I'd need for retirement. I often found online calculators didn't give me the precise options I needed, or they threw out numbers I didn't understand, or I had to re-enter manually multiple scenarios and it just took so long. But with a little Excel and some simple logic, we can build our own, including the ability to consider any fees, taxes, and even inflation. So join me as we walk through that. Okay, so a couple of facts about me before we get started. For my day job, I'm an analyst. I've built spreadsheets and I'm very comfortable with data. Before falling into my industry, which is telecoms, I was studying to become a financial advisor, and although I've never used them professionally, I have a national diploma in financial services and a certificate in financial planning. In summary then, this is bringing together two of my passions, and I hope you'll find it useful. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to teach you how to calculate compounding. And for this video, I'm going to assume you know what compounding is, but if you'd like a separate video on it, then let me know, happy to do so. It's also fair to say as well that there are sites that will explain to you how to do this, but yeah, again, I've always just found them incredibly manual and they're quite opaque, so you don't really understand the calculations behind it. So as well as teaching you how to calculate compounding, we're also going to teach you how to factor in management fees, which again, a lot of the compounding sites won't do, teach you how to factor in taxes, show the difference between monthly and annual compounding, and there is quite a big difference across a long period of time, and show you how to get the real value of your future investments after inflation. And again, that might be an important consideration if you're doing very long-term planning, need to think about what it's going to, your value of your investment in 3-4 decades time, and not how to apply this not just to shares but to any other kind of investment really. So pension is how I first developed these compound calculators, but you can really use this to project forward anything. Okay, so if that's interesting to you, stick around for the details and a thoughtful quote from a Nobel Prize winner known for his genius. But before we move on, please like, and to keep up to date with all my content, please consider subscribing. Each like means money to all our charities and Tiggywinkles, who help over 12,000 animals every year, including hedgehogs. And here's a picture of my pet hedgehog, Euclid. He definitely doesn't need any help, but he's pretty cute, so I put a picture of him in there. Let's get on with it. Okay, so let's start with yearly compounding then, and I've just set this up in Excel, nothing super fancy. In order to create the years, as I've done here from January 21 all the way down to January 60, you might think that you can just drag this down, but actually Excel will assume that you're trying to do monthly. Not an unreasonable thing, we do that plenty. So if instead you highlight these two cells like this and then drag it down, Excel will be able to work out what it is that you want to do from that. So that's the way that you would create a year in that way. What I've basically done here though is written some logic which we'll walk through shortly, so you can see here in the function bar, but we'll go through this in a bit more detail. And I've just created what probably looks fairly familiar if you've ever used a compounding website. So your initial investment, capital per year that you're expecting to contribute, your expected returns, maybe you've got fees as well. Maybe you've got taxes to consider, and maybe you want to consider the buying power if you're thinking about retiring early. Again, this is an important consideration that I've never actually seen on a compounding beforehand, but it's useful to see the value of money over time. So let's put in some real examples. So let's say your starting investment is £1,000. Now, because at the moment here, we haven't put anything else in, this is just starting with £1,000, so equals N3, just up there, nice and straightforward. And then the rest of the logic here is basically saying, whatever it was at the end of that year, which is still £1,000, take off the fees, take off the taxes, and consider inflation if you want to. Fine. So right now we haven't put any of the rest of the value in, so it's just going to stay at £1,000 forever, which doesn't seem too likely. Let's consider first of all that we're only going to do £1,000. We're not going to contribute anything else to it, and we're going to achieve a very reasonable long-term market performance of 8%. Okay, so now it's going to start compounding, right? You can see quite intuitively in the first year, 8% of £1,000 is going to be £80. So by the end of it, you've got 1,080. That then gets carried down to here, and now you've got a little bit more to start compounding. And straight away, you can see here that if you just go down to the bottom, that across 40 years here, that £1,000 turns north of 20,000. So pretty incredible, the nature of compounding. But what's even more incredible here is if you just consider maybe adding £5 a week, so that's going to be 260 per year. You could do dollars here, of course, if you're American or any other currency. I guess just focus on the numbers. So here you're doing just £260 a year, and you can see straight away, instead of a little little over 20,000. You're approaching 82,000 at the start of that year and 89,000 by the end of it. So really the power there, and maybe if you're able to contribute a little bit more, maybe £1,000 per year. Again here, so each year you're injecting 1,000, and hopefully intuitively you can sort of see how this is adding up. So you start with 1,000. You're only going to get £80 in that first year, but you're also going to add £1,000 capital. If, for example, you didn't expect to add another £1,000 in the first year, just zero it. Simple enough. It's still going to follow through in previous years. So at the end of the year you put in another 1,000, but you didn't get it at the beginning. So you finish with 2,080. That then goes down here, and now you're starting to add basically to that as well. Fees here, again, if you're sort of trading in M1 Finance or Robinhood or Trading 212 in the UK, you shouldn't really have fees, but some management funds and pension funds will have fees. So maybe here we put 1% just to see how it's working. Taxes, likewise, let's just put 1% for the sake of it. And inflation, let's leave inflation at 0 for now. Obviously, there will be that, but we just want to see our actual investment coming back. So right now, then, let's just work through this top example, and let's just zero that just to make this super clear. So in the first year, we're going to start with £1,000. We got 80%, £80 from our 8% return. But then we've also got to pay off some fees and some taxes at 1% each. And you can see here, basically, then that we've gone 1,080 minus 1080, and minus 1080 is going to give us our 1058. So great. And it's basically that straightforward. You can also see as well, if we just scroll down to the bottom here, just what an amazing impact that additional £1,000 a year makes, even with taxes and fees. Now, if we were able to keep all of this in a tax shelter, so I've just zeroed that off, and again, it's all happening automatically here. Previously we had 20,000. Now we're looking at 240,000. So just by adding the equivalent of 40,000 a year, across 40 years, so £1,000 a year, we've turned 20,000 into 240,000. So really starting to show the value of compounding here. Likewise as well, if you felt like 8% was a bit stingy over 40 years, maybe 10% is more realistic, it's very easy just to update 10% here. And again, this is going to make quite a material change here, going from 240,000 to 400,000, just because of that additional 2% that's then compounding. Pretty cool. Now, inflation in the long term is evidently 2.46%, according to a Google I did in advance. And what we should do is put it into this cell up here, just so it fixes it all for us instead of trying to do it manually. And what this is now going to show us really is the almost cost of having your money in an investment for such a long period of time, because £1,000 today isn't worth £1,000 in 40 years. And in here, what you're really looking at here by the time you get to retirement is your equivalent buying power. This is something really important to consider if you're thinking of, getting your financial independence and retiring early, because now it allows you to sort of imagine what £196,000 a year actually gets you. It's not that 405,000, and across 40 years, it's basically halved your equivalent buying power. So it's still a fantastic amount of money. But again, if you kind of want to think about what it will really do, then you need to consider this. And likewise as well, consider the fact that if you retire at, say, 50 and you want to live until you're 90, you're similarly going to see your equivalent buying power halve over that period of time. And that 2.46%, that's long-term average, so I read. But it could be 4%. And again, this is going to make quite a big difference, I suspect. Yeah, now we've gone from almost £200,000 to £127,000. So inflation can definitely have a huge impact. And it's one of those things that I don't really think is fully appreciated when you're doing this compounding. Like, yeah, if you ignore inflation, of course you're going to get some really great numbers here. And let's just put this back down to 8. I personally like 8, even if it's probably slightly too prudent across a 40-year period. I would expect to do slightly better than 8% across 40 years. But let's keep it nice and prudent. So here, you can really see the difference. We're back to 240,000. This is at 8%. But again, if we put in now our 2.46%, instead of 240,000, we've gone to 121. So effectively halving at this, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. If you do 40 times 2.5, you'll get 100%. So I would intuitively expect it to be halving as a result of that. So that's interesting to see. But this is really all there is to it. And once you've built this, you can play around with as much as you like. So one of the things I like to do, most of the time I turn off inflation because I do want to see just what the value is going to be. But I do turn inflation back on when I'm thinking about what my retirement lifestyle could be like when I'm having chats with my wife about the kind of retirement we could be having, that's actually an important consideration to bear in mind. Now, likewise here, if I sort of think about our personal situation, we started our investment last December with £38,000. That seems like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. That was £3,000 from my poker pot, and then 35,000 from some savings that we had that we didn't need to use. The reason we had those savings was we were saving up to have our first child, and it was really just in case I lost my job or anything happened. But fortunately, that didn't. So when it became obvious that my wife was returning to work and we were going to be fine, that's when we used the 35,000 that we'd saved up plus the 3,000 I kept to the side for a poker fund in cash for when I went to the casino. So £38,000, and we're actually being quite ambitious. So we're trying to target £48,000 a year. And here we're actually going to start this in year one. I wouldn't actually need to do this. What I could do is just copy that equation into there. That's probably a better way of doing it. And you'll see here, like, these are now going to be really big numbers. So if I was to do this for 40 years, you'll see here this is into 12 million. So a huge amount. Now I'm actually hoping to retire when I'm 55, so that's going to be another 22 years into the future. So 2043, if my brain is working. So you can see here, that 8%, and this is great. I want to retire with 2.5 million into this account. And if we were able to keep up this pace of cash injections for 22 years, we could do so, right? At the start of this year, it's going to be 2.9 million rounded up. If we stick it out for another year, and I may well do that until my wife gets to 55, which would sort of be more down here, then that's worth an extra £600,000 in terms of the investment pot. So you can see quickly here, how quickly inflation gets going. But likewise, before we get too excited, I do suspect that we would have to pay tax on a little bit of this. So let's say 1% tax here, and let's assume here 2.5% inflation. So let's now have a look again at these values. And you can see here, instead, it's more like we've got 1.7 million or just under £2 million in terms of equivalent buying power. So, which, by the way, for us is still absolutely a fantastic number. And that's really all there is. Now, we're going to have a look at monthly breakdowns, but we won't be spending quite as long on it because we've already walked through a lot of the logic. It's just going to be slightly different in terms of presentation. So let's get to that now. Okay, so now let's have a quick scroll through monthly. So I set this up. We don't have to do anything clever here. If we just drag this down, Excel will automatically populate the next month for us. And you can see here I'm still going to December 60, so still a 40-year horizon. We're just doing it by months effectively. And here we've put in exactly the same scenario. So 1,000, 1,000 and 8%. But here we're dividing by 12. So we're not having to mathematically wait until the end of the year to deposit. This assumes that we're actually making a monthly contribution of £83.33, recurring, I suppose. And likewise as well, because we're doing that, we're going to be compounding this monthly. So we've taken here the 8% and divided it by 12 just to give us our monthly contribution. And you can see here, if we go down to all the way to the bottom, this figure previously was, 240,000? But because we're compounding monthly rather than annually, we get a significantly bigger figure. What's that, 25% more? It's sort of 90,000, so actually a bit more than that. But, significant difference is it's added 90,000 on top of the 240,000 that we had. And therefore it's more realistically going to look like 313,000. So that's pretty great. Now, in fairness, maybe that's too ambitious, and again, you want to start playing around here with the percentages. We can easily do that. So just knocking off 1%, that's going to take it back down to 233. Maybe that is still you want to be really prudent. Here that's 175. But again, you can see here you just press one button, and then I'm just pressing Control down here just to take me to the next blank. That's a nice way to navigate if you're new to Excel. Don't use a mouse, just Control and then Direction, and it will take you to the next blank. So extremely powerful, and that's the way to do it. And likewise as well here, if we wanted to add fees and taxes, etc., we easily could do. I'm just going to put 1% in here, 1% in here, and so on. And it's all going to follow down as well. So that's really the only difference between monthly and yearly, sorry. And here you just have to remember when you're setting up your logic to just divide it by 12. And if you want to do something quarterly, you could do it in a very similar way. You'd probably have to do Jan 21, and then April 21, and then April, May, June, July. Is it September? June, July, August, September, October, May, June, July, August 21. April, May, June, July 21. We'll get there in a second. July, August, September, and then October 21. There we go. That makes a lot more sense. And now I think if we just highlight these and drag it down, this should give us our quarterly. There we go. So again, we're just sort of teaching Excel exactly what we wanted to do. And if we did set it up in this way, instead of dividing it by 12, we just divide it by 4, right? Because now we're dividing it by quarter instead. So it's super flexible. You can easily build this yourself. If you wanted to go through this video and pause it and literally copy the logic, that would be perfectly fine as well. But it's fairly straightforward to set this up. And once you do set it up, it's extremely powerful in terms of just looking at some options. So again here, if I just undo that, I'm just pressing Control Z, a nice little shortcut as well. And now we're back to our monthly. And again here, this is one of the things I like to play around with. So here, you know, if you weren't sure if you could contribute an extra £2,000 per year, this is going to show you what the impact will be over that period of time. It's 600,000. But if you only do 1,000, then it's 300,000, right? So, you know, just by doubling, and that really, I mean, it is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but you're going from £20 a week to £40 a week. So, and by doing that, you end up with a pot at the end of it that's £300,000 more. So it can be extremely effective, and for me personally, very motivational. You know, if I need to find an additional 20 quid a week, that's a coffee a day comfortably, and then I'm going to be able to find that money. So for me, if I'm having to go without today just for brighter tomorrow, I can find that extremely motivating and keeping me focused. So that's really the only difference between annual and monthly. Okay, and as I promised at the beginning, you can apply this not just to your shares investments, but really to any investments. And just to show you a real world example, these are actually my and my wife's working pension pots, effectively. And I created this because I was using Standard Life, which is where my current employer pays into. And it was just annoying me because they were making assumptions that I didn't feel were particularly true, or I didn't want. One of them was, you know, it was expecting me to annually increase my pay by 3.5%. No idea if that's reasonable or not. But as a result of that, their number ended up £150,000 higher than mine was. And I just didn't really want to bake that assumption into my numbers. You know, if it happens, great. But I'm not assuming that I'm going to always be getting 3.5% a year on my pay. So that was, I think, just something. And what I've done here is a very similar sort of logic. I've made it way simpler and just done starting, paying in, and then return. And again, here I'm assuming a long-term return of 8%. I say long-term, it's about 24 years until I can access this money. The earliest I'll be able to get it is 57. But here, you know, each month between my employer and myself and the tax man, we're paying in £700. And all I'm doing here, I guess this does look like a bit more of a complicated maths equation than it really is. But what it's really saying is this is my starting number. So I did this in February, so I'm not paying anything extra in because I've already paid it in this month. And it's basically saying, you know, take this value, add this value, and then multiply it by that, and then put that down here. So you can see here, this is in March. This is what I'm expecting to start with. This is what I'm expecting to start with in March, and this is what's currently in my pension pot. So these are reasonably aligned. This figure is just based on almost a monthly return of 0.67%, which is 8% divided by 12. At the moment, I'm evidently slightly outperforming, or this fund is outperforming. So what will happen is that once March begins, I'll actually transfer this number into here as an actual, and then it will start to project it forward. And over time, we'll just make this more accurate as we go through time, and that will be the way that I effectively manage it. And you can see if I now scroll all the way to the bottom, so this is I've actually done this to May 42, which is when I expect to retire, or I won't be working anymore. And then I'll be living off my ISA for a couple of years. But you can see here the total is 622,000. Fantastic. Now in the UK, you can take 25% of this tax-free, which I basically think you always should, because it then means that you'll never pay tax on that money. The rest you will have to pay income tax on because you didn't pay it when you contributed to your pension. I don't personally think that's too unfair. You have to pay tax sooner or later. And actually, it's very nice to get this 25% tax-free. But you can see we're just doing exactly the same and projecting it forward. And this is what I expect to happen. And again, as we go through time here, we'll be able to make this gradually more accurate. So let's say it stays at this level. I can program this in, and then that's going to automatically update everything else. So it's very straightforward, and that's the way I like to manage it. This pension here is even easier because it's consolidating my previous jobs into a single pension. So I'm not actually paying in anything additional. This is what it's currently worth. I expect it to be worth 25551, 25 and a half. For March the 1st. It's currently worth 25540, so almost banging on line. £11 under, but again here I can take this across and it'll slightly reduce for the next few decades, so very straightforward, and I'll just manage that exactly the same. This is my wife's pension, so great. So this is where we currently are. Super simple logic as well. She's not been working for as long as me and also pays slightly less because her employer has a slightly less generous setup. So this is hers. But you can see here we've just used 8% as well and everything else. Now, what I didn't touch on the previous page and what I sort of recommend you to do is play around with some numbers. And what I did is I changed these numbers and made it, 10%, 8%, 6%, 4%, and 2%, just to see the sort of difference it would make over time. And we've got this 8% here, which is what we're expecting to do. So these will be the same numbers that we scroll to the bottom we'll see, hopefully. Here we've got the Royal London, 75% is 213. Let's just scroll down and see if we get that. Excellent. Yes, our remaining is 213. So that's what I would have expected to see. Oh, I just went to the end there too far. And what we've done, or what I've done here, is we've just created a value so that I can compare it. So if everything happens as I expect and we get 8% in the long run, we're going to have a private pension of 788,000 a year, which will be invested, and let's say we get 4% on that. So here, let's just times that by 4%. So that's going to be producing an income of 31,500 per year. Fantastic. And we also get 262,000, but it could be a little bit better. So here, if I just do that for others, if the market performs 10% for the next few decades, it's 44,000. But if it's only 6%, it's going to be 22,000. 4% would be 16, 17. And 2% would be under 13. I think that's super unlikely. I think most likely it's going to be somewhere between 6 and 10 feels pretty okay to me, to be perfectly honest with you. And again, you can see the impact this has on our lump sum numbers, so it can be quite powerful. You could also potentially play around with your contribution here and see what impact that would make, and then take a copy of that and put it over here. But you can very easily see, I hope, that it allows you to play around with numbers in a way that you won't get the flexibility with on an online calculator. It's not, and that's okay. The calculators are designed to be a fairly blunt tool, whereas Excel, with a bit of logic, you can be quite adaptable in what you can do. Okay, so I hope you found that very useful. I love Richard Feynman. In my opinion, he's the best physicist of the last 50 or so years. He has an excellent book, or sorry, somebody wrote an excellent book about him called Genius, which is sort of a autobiography of Richard Feynman. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's really brilliant. The man is a character for sure, and I think this quote really resonates about what we were doing today. So that which I cannot build, I do not understand. I think it really resonates with me personally about kind of really trying to apply yourself to understanding rather than just accepting. It's probably a bit easier to do if your name is Richard Feynman and you've won a Nobel Prize for your pretty revolutionary approach to quantum physics. But yeah, I fully recommend that book and Richard Feynman in general. He's definitely a colourful character. I think this quote is excellent, and I hope you consider it moving forward if you do try and build your own compound calculator. Thank you very much, everybody.